We increasingly view children as obstacles to our self-optimization instead of part of a meaningful human life. We've petified our kids. In other words, we've turned them into pets. Like, oh, hey, look at my dog. Watch Remy roll over. Watch Remy roll this way. Watch Remy play dead. And if we can't do that, and we can't figure out how to get all the things that we want, I want to travel. Okay, cool. Travel. But you're losing something without kids. And well, I'm not going to do that. Just stay on script here, Joe. Culturally, what we've done is we've made a massive shift. Historically, people had children in wars, in famines, economic collapses, uncertainty, disease, and instability. So when people say to me, well, we're not having kids because the world feels uncertain, I just don't buy it. I'm sure that's part of it, but we'd also be intellectually lazy to not admit that that is the socially acceptable answer. Because human beings have always lived with uncertainty. We've always had wars. We've always had corrupt leadership. I think something deeper changed, and I think we created a culture that increasingly asks, how can I maximize my own experience? How do I live my life to the fullest? And we've defined fullest as how do I get the most pleasure out of my life? And we're selfish. I'm just going to say it. I think the two things, I'm getting so excited I hit my mic. I think the two things that happen the most is we want everything right now. We're not willing to wait for our kids to get a little bit older. And so we've delayed. First we were like, we'll delay having kids, right? We'll just wait. Well, then I'm too old. I don't want to do it. So now we're just not going to have them. And the idea that the world's overpopulated, it isn't working, folks. That isn't helpful. China said that, and now they're in real trouble. Those stats are all out there. I know when I listen to anything audibly that just gives me stats, I tend to fall off. But if you don't believe me, you can go look those up. I think the problem is kids force us to be selfless, not selfish. People that have kids fight more because one of the things that kids do is, again, they reveal our desire to be perfect, our perfectionism, how we're not going to fail and we're going to be perfect and we can't have disagreements. Kids reveal our just incessant need for control. And they also reveal how little control we have. And so this is where it gets into mental health and meaning, because what ties into all of this is a life built around comfort, immediacy, and selfishness becomes surprisingly fragile. Because even a life cultivated to avoid sacrifice will eventually run into sacrifice, because life will come for it. It will demand endurance. It will demand patience. It will demand responsibility. And if your entire emotional framework is, I should avoid discomfort at all costs, and adulthood itself starts to feel overwhelming. And this is why people, when I'm an adult today, I can't handle it. If your entire framework is, my life has to be about me, you can't have kids, because kids demand something of you. And most of our children, we are now at 50 years of telling our children that they're the most important person in their universe. I hear people say, my kids are my whole world. Okay, that actually probably isn't healthy. That's probably the other side of this coin that we're talking about today. Because relationships become harder when you can't have discomfort. Parenting, it has to be terrifying. And we don't do anything that we're afraid of, right? We need to talk about how we've approached parenting. Commitment feels restrictive. Well, I don't want to commit to that. We joke, I have commitment issues. I don't want to sign up for a phone contract, which I don't. I get that, the phone part. But yeah, relationships have a commitment. There's a commitment. You have a kid. Responsibility feels oppressive. Well, I got to work. That's me being responsible. I pay my mortgage and I pay for my traveling. Okay, what about doing something that means more than you or your pleasure? I want to be clear. I'm not saying that kids cure mental health struggles. They absolutely don't. But I am saying that meaning often does improve mental health, and meaning requires sacrifice. Meaning often does improve health, and meaning often requires sacrifice. Our culture typically wants meaning without sacrifice. They want purpose without responsibility. We want connection without inconvenience, I'll fit you in when I can. And we want growth without discomfort. It doesn't work. One of the things Viktor Frankl talked about after surviving the concentration camps of the Germans was that human beings can endure unbelievable suffering if they believe there's meaning in it. And meaning changes endurance. It improves it. And I think what's happening is we're watching a culture slowly lose meaning while simultaneously becoming more emotionally fragile. And that should concern us. We should look at how we're parenting. We should look at how we're using the tools. And one of the things that we should do is we should look at what are we teaching the next generation. Because some of it, and I've met people like this, I know a person that I'm pretty sure doesn't want to be a parent because he doesn't want to be a dad like his dad was. He doesn't want to be a bad dad. And we have to talk about that. We have to talk about, what do we do with bad dads? What do we do with bad moms? What do we do with parents that make the world all about them? Because I'm also not talking about that today. I'm not saying, hey, you should have kids so that they can be the sole center of your universe. I absolutely hate that when people are like, oh, my kids are my whole world. Okay, well, that's not healthy either. That's not healthy for them or for you. I also think there's another layer that we have to talk about here that we don't often want to talk about. We're increasingly rejecting the idea of transcendence. And for a lot of people, this life is now viewed as it's all there is. Like, we're here, we die, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And if this life is all there is, then making the most out of my personal happiness actually starts to make sense, right? If it's just, there's nothing beyond this, and I don't have a personal responsibility to anything, there's no afterlife, well, then I'm good to go. And of course, that person would prioritize travel, comfort, experiences, freedom, and self-fulfillment. Why wouldn't he? If there's no bigger story, no eternal framework, no larger meaning, then personal comfort becomes one of the highest values available. Again, I'm not saying that every person who doesn't believe in an afterlife is selfish. That would be ridiculous. That would be insane. But I am saying that cultures are shaped by what they ultimately believe life is for. And when sacrifice loses meaning, people stop sacrificing. And when we stop sacrificing, decline in growth rates of our culture should not surprise us. Now, there are a couple other things that work against it. The media has told us for a long time that we're overpopulated. We've been told that people who have kids are more likely to get divorced. That's been disproven. The overpopulation thing is one that is constantly hotly debated. And then the other thing is this one isn't so much the media. It is more, again, I'm not blaming media. We're the ones who believe it and then act upon it.